All right. So I'm gonna like start by presenting some slides, but I'm actually gonna be jumping back and forth between my slides and RStudio because, well, I find I learn best by doing. So that's what's gonna happen here. So let's jump in. The most important message, no, I'm just kidding, not the most important, but I do want to let you know that I don't by any means consider myself a Git or GitHub expert. I am very much still learning all there is to know about Git and GitHub. I think maybe what happened is I put like a YouTube video out there at some point about using Git and GitHub in RStudio, and somehow people thought that meant I knew what I was doing. But now I feel like I know enough. So that being said, now you might be asking yourself, wait a second, like, why should I learn from her? Actually, I'm sorry, I have my slides in the opposite order. I want to learn GitHub, right? I want to share code with others so they can use it. I want my code backed up somewhere other than my computer in case my computer crashes. I hate keeping track of different versions of code and other files. So like, I don't miss the days of having like, final version. I swear this is my final version of the paper documents. So that's a good thing. Another thing you should know about me is I really don't like using like the terminal or the shell. And if you don't know what those things are, that's fine. For some reason, they still scare me a little bit. So I try to avoid using them at any cost. So Git and GitHub are going to help us with all of this. And before I dive in, can I just have like, if you can just show like any sort of reaction, a raised hand, a smiley face, whatever you would like. How many of you already use Git and GitHub? Okay, let's see. I think it's less than half, so that's good. I'm really catering this talk to people who have never used Git and GitHub before, so some of you might get a low review, and I'm okay with that. And then why should you learn this from me? Well, Git and GitHub were really intimidating to me at first, and some parts about them still are. And like when I was first learning this, I think the first resource I went to was Jenny Bryan's, why am I forgetting the name of it? Happy Git with R, which I think is a really great resource, but like I needed a baby version of that. Like I needed someone to show me every single step. And like when I got some weird error, I needed someone to tell me why. So because I'm still new enough, I still sort of remember that scariness. So I think it's like a good time for me to teach you. In a few years, if I get sort of too good at Git and GitHub, then I probably shouldn't teach you anymore because I'll like forget what was hard about it. Yeah, so I hope you feel comfortable here. Like if you run into weird errors, which I'm sure is going to happen, please ask questions. Interrupt me if I do something too quickly. There's no stupid questions here. Okay, so to get started, I am going to, and maybe I'll just do this right away just to, so I am sharing my desktop. So just, don't judge me for my messy desktop, please. I'll try to keep it hidden as much as possible. So I'm just gonna open RStudio right now. Oh, and it looks like I have, let me close that. Okay. There are a few libraries well, I guess I'm realizing I have made an assumption that all of you have used R and RStudio, which I guess I didn't even think about asking, but could I just get like again, reactions of any sort if you use R and RStudio? Okay. I see a lot more thumbs up for this one, so I think that's good. My assumption going in was that we would all have R in RStudio. So in addition to that, you will likely need to install some libraries. So maybe I can try to put these in the chat. Oh, sorry, I just, oops, and of course I did not paste that correctly. I'm going to paste these in the chat, but just know that like when you copy and paste from the chat in Zoom, it always does weird things like add little dots to the end or something weird like that. So just watch that when you paste those into your RStudio. So I'm just gonna, for now, I'm gonna load all these libraries. I will also let you know that I'm pretty sure we don't need all of these, but to be honest, I couldn't remember which ones we don't need. So they're just all there and they won't hurt you to have them. So erring on the side of having more than what we need. I know we need the first two. So if you don't have those two, for sure, get those installed. Okay. Let me pull that out of the way here. Okay. So we will kind of jump back to these libraries, but I just wanted people to be able to install those if you don't have those. Okay, and again, I know some of you have used Git and GitHub before, so some of these things are going to be a repeat for you, and I'm okay with that. So hopefully you are as well. So the first thing you're going to want to do, if you've never used Git and GitHub before, is create a GitHub account. So I'm going to post this in the chat. This is just a link to GitHub. And if you click on this link, you will likely not see anything like I'm seeing. If you've never used it before, you're going to get to a screen where it says something like sign up for GitHub or something like that. And that's what you should do. So you should create a user account and a password. And once you log in, then you should get to sort of a space somewhat like this. I can't remember what it looks like when you first log in. It might, I don't really know what page they bring you to when you first log in. Maybe that, a page like that, perhaps. Any questions about creating the GitHub account?
There's a question in the chat about maybe the relationship between Git and GitHub.
Sure. So yes, I'll kind of get into that, although I totally admit that I'm going to skip some of that technicality. But I think of GitHub as being more of like the user interface and sort of like what I see online, and Git is sort of like the versioning system. So like, you know, I could actually use Git and version my materials or my, yeah, sure, my materials, my files and whatnot. I could use that on my computer. GitHub is sort of like what pushes it out online. Hopefully I did that enough justice. I am going to have us all create a fresh repository, by the way. Hopefully that answers the question that's in the chat right now. Okay. Did I give everyone enough time to get the GitHub account set up? Just like frantically wave your arms or unmute or something if you need me to slow down. Because again, this is the kind of stuff where like, sometimes it seems really easy and then you run into like this weird error that I don't know unless you tell me about it. Okay. So now we have GitHub set up. We're going to come back to that later and kind of link things together. Now we're gonna set up Git. So we have to install and configure Git. And this to me was a super scary part when I did this, because I had to like type some things into the terminal, which, like I already told you, feels like a scary place for me to be. This process is sort of different whether you have a Mac or a Windows, but I'll kind of try to talk through it. So I tend to just use this terminal pane within RStudio. Again, I'm already afraid enough of the terminal. I really try not to leave RStudio. It's where I'm most comfortable. So at least if I use the terminal here, I feel like I'm in a more comfortable spot. In the terminal, oh, apparently that's left over from when I did this just moments ago. I am going to type this same command that I have here, which is the word which, W-H-I-C-H, space, and then the word git, G-I-T. And if you have Git installed, you should see something sort of like this. It might not look exactly like this, but oh, you don't see the terminal in your RStudio. I believe if you go to tools, can you see where I'm clicking on tools up here? And then if you go to terminal, you can try doing new terminal. Otherwise, you can also click on this shell thing, which it's going to look maybe a little bit scarier. Again, I probably shouldn't tell you how scared I am of the terminal, but if you need to, you can also use this shell and you can type which space git in there as well. Now, how many of you, when you typed that, either got sort of something different or it gave some sort of error or weird message or something? Or do all of you seemingly have Git installed? Okay.
I have a quick question. Should that,
yeah,
is that USR local? Should that be, like, mine says something else. It seems like a username, which I don't recognize.
I
mean,
I'm not sure. Are you on like, are you like on a, I don't know, like a company computer? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's what it is.
That could be it. Again, this is where I'm not an expert and I don't have a positive answer for you, but let's sort of assume for now that it's okay. And if it's not, we'll definitely catch that later.
Okay, sounds good.
And we can always go back and try to fix it. Okay, so thanks, Sonia. Yeah, I didn't actually know that there was a Windows specific command for that, so I learned something too. Okay, so assuming that we all have Git installed, and a lot of Macs just come with it installed. If you just didn't want to tell me that you don't have it, on this next page, I will copy some links into the chat. If you're on a Windows machine and you need Git, you're going to go there to install it. And where did I go here? If you're on a Mac, you can actually go back to the terminal. And if you type, oops, where's my RStudio? So like when I type this, I get the actual version of Git that I have. But if you don't have Git, it will usually ask you to install it. Otherwise, if that doesn't work and you don't have it, you can also try typing git space config. which I don't think this will do anything, but I'm going to skip typing it on my computer for now, just because I don't want to delay us, just in case it does something. The other thing that Mac users might need is this thing called Xcode. And I would say for now, let's just skip this part and we will find out later if you don't have this. I believe what happens is you won't be able to push things. Your push and pull buttons are sort of grayed out. And you may not know what that means yet, and that's okay. We'll discover that later. So let's skip that for now, and we might need to come back to it for some of you. Okay, so for now, we should be done with using the terminal. And we're gonna go back to just like using the console in RStudio for a bit. So for this next part, we're gonna configure Git, so set up the Git part. Let's see, so we're gonna use this function called use_git_config. This does come from the use this library. So I'm gonna jump back over here, go in the console. I already loaded the use this library, so I'm not going to load it again. But if you needed to install that and haven't loaded that library yet, make sure to run the library use this function. And then in this part, I can just copy and paste this in the chat too. But if you paste that into the console, do make sure to make the appropriate changes. So change your username. This can be whatever you want. I think it makes sense to make your username the same as what you made it in GitHub, but it doesn't have to be. Your user email does have to be the same as the email that you used in GitHub online. Okay, so like my email is lisa.lendway@gmail.com. That's the email I used to sign up for GitHub. That would have to be exactly the same thing here. Yep, and this is in the console now. So notice I'm out here in the console. I'm not in the scary terminal anymore. Okay. When again, I'm gonna skip this step because I've already configured Git on my computer, but I do want to give you a moment to do that. Did anyone experience any weird errors trying to do that? And really do speak up. Like if you have issues, I don't know that unless you say something. Okay, and maybe everything is just going as planned, which is wonderful. Okay. Now this part that we didn't used to have to do, but I think it was like, I don't know. I don't remember the date. Sometime this summer, I think, because I think I delayed it as long as possible. You have to set up this thing called a personal access token, or a PAT. Thankfully, there are some nice functions to help us. These come from the use this library, which you should already have loaded. So I'm going to paste this in the chat. It's called create_GitHub_token. And if you just paste that in here, yeah, if you already have a token, you don't need to do this part, I think. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it asks, it brings me here. I'm just going to skip this part, but the rest of you should go in here, sign into GitHub, and then it will bring you I don't remember if this will change it for me. think I'm gonna skip this, but it'll bring you somewhere. There's gonna be this sort of like long, ugly set of alphanumeric characters. And that is your personal access token. You will need that token for sure in a moment, and likely you will need it at some point in the future. So store that in a special place. And I am not an expert on where to store these things, but store it in a good spot.
So I'm on the page to create a token, and it gives an
Yes.
option for expiration. When is that useful? What does that mean?
You know, I think that feature is, I want to say that that wasn't there when I initially created my token, but I did have students ask me about that. So like if you have an expiration date, which is, you know, security wise, I guess probably a good idea, but again, I'm not a security expert. It will expire at a certain date. So like my students did that, and they experienced, like, you know, this week, of course, during finals week, they expired, and then they had to, you have to go create a new one, I believe.
Okay, but you won't like lose any code or anything.
No.
Oh, thanks.
Yep. Okay. So assuming you could all create that token, and do let me, that was a great question. Thanks for asking. See how quickly, like once you know this stuff, you forget all those little details that like I should have written that down, or maybe it changed since I did it. Okay. So the next part we're going to use requires us to have the Git creds package, which was one of the packages I asked you to load before. But in case you haven't loaded it yet, make sure to load that library Git creds. And then from there, we're going to use this function that is git creds _set. And I'm going to put that over here. And again, I really wish I could exactly replicate this for you, but I can't. So I already have a personal access token in here. So like if I needed to create a new one, this is where I could choose number 2 and replace my old credentials. I can click number 3, which I'm not going to do just because I don't want to share my stuff, you know, on YouTube. But if you, for some reason, need to see your PAT at some point, you can actually use this to see your token. Or I can choose number 1, which I'm not quite sure why it does this. I don't know if this does it for anyone else who has a PAT. This always gives me an error, but then it just says something like, I decided not to update my credentials. So not quite sure why that's an error, but it's not really an error. Okay. Was everyone able to put their PAT in there? Or any troubles with the PATs? Okay, so Nikki, that to me looks like you might not have Git installed. Were you able to do all the sort of initial things that we did? Can you, let's see, did you just, okay, let me stick with Nikki's question here real quick. If you're sure you have Git installed, did you just install the use this and the Git creds packages? If so, I would try closing RStudio and reopening it. If you just installed those packages. And let's see if that fixes it. And then, is it ISTI? Yours says adding new credentials. Did anyone else get it? Something that says adding new credentials?
I now try to rerun the same line, just the git creds underscore said, and now it gives me the same kind of output you have. So I don't know what
Okay,
it was.
good. So again, it's been a while since I put my PAT in here. So that might just be the message you get when you first load your PAT in there. Yes, the personal access token. I just don't remember. And yes, I think I kept all the defaults in GitHub too. I can't imagine that I would have changed anything. Okay. So I feel like there's probably a few people who haven't quite been able to finish this part, but can I have people give a reaction, raised hand or whatever other emoji thing you would like, just letting me know that you have gotten through the PAT part. Okay, I saw quite a few like various thumbs up and whatnot. So I think I want to move on, but again, those of you who are running into mistakes or errors or weird things, this really is your time to ask these questions. So don't feel bad doing that. I have a ton of slides in here, but if we don't get through them all, that is totally fine. Okay. I think that's it for this page. Now we're gonna like, if you think everything has gone well up to this point, now we're gonna like really find out if everything worked. So this is always fun / scary. Okay, so I think this is my GitHub main page, right? So the next thing we're gonna do is jump over to GitHub. So this is online, just go to github.com. And I am in, let's see here, let me make sure Sarah, that is a great question. I think you should replace it with the one you just created. Yes, maybe someone else can post the links to the slides real quick.
Happy to do that.
Thanks. Okay, so now we're in GitHub. So when you log into GitHub, you'll either be here or you might be on like a main repository page. Either way, on both of those pages, there should be a button that says new, and we're all going to click on this new repository button. And it should bring you to a page that looks like this. Is everyone able to find the new repository button? Okay, I see no questions, so I'm going to take that as a yes. And we're all going to create a repository. And I will be honest, if you go look through my repositories, you will probably see 20 of them called something like test repo, because I teach a lot of students how to create repositories, and then I always forget to go and delete them. So we'll find out. See, I already have one called test. Let's see. I already have one called test repo. We'll call this test repo Baltimore, because I'm really creative. I like to put a few words in this description. More, okay. And I'm just going to jump back to my slides to make sure I'm not forgetting to tell you something that I wanted to tell you. Okay. I'm going to keep this public, and I say to keep it public, although if you want, you could certainly make it private so nobody sees it. But I encourage you to make it public. It doesn't really matter. I pretty much always add a README file. This is sort of the, I'll show you when we're finished, but it's like a little description of what's in our repository that shows up on the main page of your repository. So we'll add that README file. And then I've tried to get into the habit of choosing a license, which gives you sort of some power over what's in there. I am not a lawyer either. I feel like I've told you a whole bunch of things I'm not an expert in. Lately, I've been choosing the MIT license, but again, I don't really know enough about licenses to advise you which one you should choose. So having one seems better than not having one. When you've done all of that, you should click Create Repository, and then some magic will happen and it should bring you. Sophia, yes, there is definitely something to a good README file. We're not going to get into those nitty-gritty details right now. For now, we're gonna be happy if you have a couple sentences in there saying what it is. And I think that's a great starting place, and you'll learn how to make those README files fancier. But to start, just a couple sentences about what's in your repository, mainly so like future you remembers, is a great place to start, in my opinion. Okay. So now we have this repository. It is living out on GitHub. Like, you know, I think of this as being like out in, you know, the cloud or like out on the internet, right? It's like floating around there somewhere. I picture it being up in the sky for some reason, but whatever. It's out there. It is not at all living on my computer yet. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is connect this repository. And I guess in case I didn't mention, I've now gotten used to the words repository, or we often like to say repo, because apparently it takes too long to say the word repository. So repo or repository is just sort of like what that word means in English. It's just sort of like a place to put stuff. We're going to store things here. So now what we want to do is connect this repository that's out on GitHub, out online. We want to connect that to our computer. And we're going to do that by what's a process called cloning. So I think of this as like copying it, but keeping the connection between the two. So, and again, let me just check my slides to make sure I haven't forgotten to tell you anything. I don't think I have. And let me actually just check in really quick and make sure everyone was able to successfully make a repository. Raha, that is a great question. And I think that'll be clear in like a minute or so. Great question. Okay, so we're gonna clone this repository. And I'm going to do that by clicking on this green code button. And then this little, I don't know, double square button is going to copy this URL. Once we have that copied, we're now going to go over to RStudio. And like Raha just alluded to, this is very much connected with RStudio projects. If you've ever used RStudio projects, which I highly recommend doing. So now, let me fix this screen a bit. Okay, can you see when I click on that file button? Can you see that part of my screen?
Yeah, we can see the
Okay.
menu.
Okay, thanks. So now that we're in RStudio, by the way, if you have files open in RStudio that are unsaved, you might want to just save those files just in case, because we are going to open a new project here. So in RStudio, we're going to go to File, New Project. So Raha, we are creating a new project. And here we're going to go down to version control. And this is where we're going to find out a couple of things here. So like if you thought you had Git installed and you don't, you likely won't even see Git here. So if that happens to you, do let me know in the chat or raise your hand or something. Hopefully most of us have this. You're going to click Git. And at this point, you should see exactly what's on my screen. So this is where I'm now going to paste that repository URL that we just copied. And here by default, it although this wasn't always the case with my students, but for me, it always sort of uses this part of my name as the project directory name. And then here you can navigate to wherever you want this. And this is one of the few things I put on my desktop. And if you see my desktop, you'll see it's full of folders called test repo. And I always hope that I'll go back and delete them, but then I forget to do that. So now I'm going to click Create Project. You saw a bunch of sort of stuff happen up on the screen there. And it now opened a new RStudio session. Over here in the bottom right, I will see my license and README along with a couple more files, which I'll talk about in a second. And then in the upper right-hand corner, at least in the default settings in RStudio, you'll see the Git tab. Do any of you not see the Git tab up there? Okay, I don't see any hands up. Let's see, is there a way to edit the location of a current project? Let's see, Jasmine, are you asking, you sort of want to put a current project into a GitHub repository? Okay, let's maybe talk about that in a little bit. There are ways to do that. I'm trying to show you the easiest way to sort of get up and running with GitHub in RStudio, and the easiest way by far is to create the repository on GitHub and then to clone it to your computer. If you already have a project started, you certainly can turn it into a GitHub repository and sort of push everything out there. But let's sort of save that just because I know it's already 2:53. Yeah. Let's see here. Does it matter if the repository is private? I am not sure, but okay, so let me do this. I see that there are definitely a few questions and I do want to get to those. I think what I want to do is try to get people at a place where if they're able, people can sort of practice doing some things with Git and GitHub. And then those of you who have questions, I can take those. Let's see here. Let me jump back to my slides really quick because I tend to forget. Okay, so yep, so in our Git tab, if you don't have any errors, you should see 2 new files here. So this is because we created an RStudio project. So when we do that, it automatically adds that .r_proj file. And then this git ignore file is always added as well. I'm not going to get into what that git ignore file is. I think when you're new to GitHub, it's enough to think about other things. Let's see here. Jumping back to my, okay, so let's just, actually, I'm gonna do something a little bit different than what I say in my slides, just because it'll give us like sort of an easy test to see if we can push things out to GitHub. So these two files that you have over here, these are living on our computer right now. So I can see them like down in my set of files down here. And if I open my Finder, I would see them, you know, in that folder. So my R project folder, if you're used to working with R projects, that's sort of like the same thing as my repository on my computer. But if I go back out to GitHub, and even if I refresh this page, notice I don't see that git ignore and the .r_proj file out here because they're still just living on my computer. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to push these files out to GitHub. So there's a few steps to do that. So I'm going to stage these files. So if I, all that means is putting little checks in the boxes next to that staged column. And then I'm going to click on this commit button. And when I do that, I get this, again, if you're not used to it, like to me, this screen was just so weird looking, and it still is if I think about it, I'm just used to it now. So you get this sort of weird looking box. And if you sort of click around on these files, it'll actually show you what these files look like. Yeah, let me just redo what I just did. So put check marks next to both of these files. And then I'm going to click the commit button that's on the Git tab. And that's what brings up this sort of weird looking screen. So at this point, I'm going to write a commit message. Now, this is, it's good to write yourself nice messages that'll help future you figure out what it is you did at this step. So I forget where I heard this from. Actually, it might have been Shannon, who I think is Shannon Pelegi. Is she part of Our Ladies Baltimore, maybe? Maybe not. I forget. Maybe she's Philly. Anyways, somewhere I heard that you should start all your commit messages with a verb, which I think is a good idea. And it like tells you what you're doing in this step. Now, I can recommend that. Don't look at any of my commit messages because they might not all start that way. So here I'm just going to say add git ignore, if I can spell, and .r_proj files. So now I know what I did in this step. And then I'm going to press this commit button. Make sure that these have checks next to the boxes, because these are the specific files you're committing. And then you'll get this other strange box that pops up, and it's telling you exactly what happened. And when I think about committing, we can then, once we see this message, we can then close this, and we can close this other box. So when I think about committing, I think about that meaning I've now committed this to local memory. This is like a git step. So this means this change that we've made can be tracked. So if I click on this little clock button here, this is going to show me the history of my commits. And I will see that this is the step I just made. So this is now like permanently logged. It knows I did this. I could actually come back to this point in my analysis if I wanted to. So I've committed it locally. If I go back out to GitHub, even if I refresh this page, I still don't see those files out here because that change was still a local change. If I want it to show up out on GitHub, this is where we need to do something called pushing. And that is where we could have done this in that other commit window. Actually, if I open this up again, you see this little green push arrow here as well. I'm going to go ahead and just do it here because it's here. So are any of you seeing sort of like grayed out arrow buttons? They look sort of like, I don't know, lighter versions of the color that are on my screen. You'll find out in a second. So I'm going to push. I'm going to click on that green arrow. This screen will pop up and it's telling me like, okay, now I'm sending it out to the internet in really weird language, but that's essentially what it says. And at this point, as long as I don't get any errors here, I should now be able to go out to GitHub. And if I refresh, I will now see that my gitignore file and my .rproj file are both out here now. And you can see my commit message shows up next to those two files. Okay, I am and want to be mindful of the time here. So questions on any of that? And for those of you who have used GitHub before, I'm quite certain you've done these steps before, but questions? Oh, shoot. Okay, this is sort of embarrassing, but my parents are picking my children up from school right now, and they just texted me, and I have to send them an important message really quick. Give me just 1 second. I'm sorry.
Well, Lisa, does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question as well? And maybe not in the chat. All right. Okay. So now what I would like to happen is I do want to give folks, so I think on this previous page, I was actually going to have you change, make some changes to the README file, but I think assuming that a lot of you are our users, and this is why you want to learn how to use GitHub, I think maybe what would be more appropriate would be to let's get like an R markdown file in our repository. Okay, so I'm just going to illustrate that here. So in RStudio, I'm going to go to File, New File. You could add an R script too if that's what you work in more. I always use R markdown nowadays, so I'm just going to let sort of the default thing come in here. And then I am very quickly, I'm going to go File, Save As. And notice, at least for me, and I think this should be the case, this should pop up like in your current project, which again is your repository. So if you save this file to that spot, great, now I have to come up with a name. We are going to call this Our Ladies Baltimore, if I can spell Baltimore. There we go. I'm going to save that file here.
And as soon as I save that file, it shows up over in this Git tab. What I would love to happen now is I would love to have folks just sort of practice doing some committing and pushing. So I'll walk through it one more time with this file, and then I kind of just want you to play around with using those functions if you haven't done it before. So I'm gonna click on this file. I stage it first. I commit it. If you forget to stage it right away and you click the commit button, you can always click the file inside this window as well. And I'm going to put add our markdown file. And I'm going to commit that. And again, I get the screen that tells me sort of what was added to that or what was committed. And then my advice when you're new to Git and GitHub is to commit, save, commit, and push often. You're better off doing it more than you need to rather than waiting long periods of time. I feel like that's where I always ran into mistakes. Once you've used it for a while, I think you sort of get into a decent rhythm of, you know, what works well for you, how often you want to commit and how often you want to push. But I think at first, you're better off doing it more than you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and push that change out. As long as, you know, there's sort of like no errors or warnings in this part, which I hope there aren't at first, you're good. And then you can always close these two windows. And again, I did this especially at first, but I still often do this. I always like to, you know, just refresh my repository online and just make sure that the file that I pushed out there is actually there. And I can see I have my R markdown file out here now. So what I would recommend is, you know, taking that R markdown file, or if you put an R file out there, and just starting to make some changes to it, maybe add some libraries to your R markdown file, or just like delete some stuff. And every time you do that, notice when I first delete it, it doesn't show up in Git right away because I haven't saved my file. So it doesn't know yet that the file is different. As soon as I save it, as long as I've made changes, well, which you have to have made changes if it's asking you to save it. So as soon as you save it, it'll show up in this Git tab. And then you can just kind of keep practicing committing and pushing. So I think I'm actually over the time I was slotted for. I have a whole bunch of other things I could talk about, but maybe I'll, you know, take any questions, or if people sort of want to do, I'm happy to do whatever. And Stephanie, you can sort of help direct me.
Yeah, well, first, maybe we can just say, give a round of applause to Lisa. We can either emojis or unmute yourself and just say thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And then